All right. Good afternoon and welcome back. Up next, we've got Philip Joseph talking about building workflows into Drupal Webforms. Off you go.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining the session on building workflows into Drupal Webforms. You know, anytime there's a presentation on workflows, it sounds a bit daunting, so let's try to make this at least mildly interesting. My talk was previously titled Building Webform Workflows Using Core Workflows and Webform Workflows Element module. It wasn't my best work, and I've tried to simplify it into building workflows into Drupal Webforms, a practical guide. And a lot like workflows, I think simplicity is key. Everyone's here. I'm happy to start. My name is Philip Joseph. People call me PJ in the office, mostly because they're lazy. I work at a lovely company called Symphony 3, and I've been working as a digital consultant there since early 2018. My first job in the initial couple of years at Symphony 3 was just lots and lots of site building, so configuring views, content models, content types, web forms, you name it. And I also spent a lot of time configuring an open source CRM called Civi CRM that tightly integrates with Drupal. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it. With Symphony 3, we primarily work with building digital platforms, so think customer portals, forms, platforms, websites, mostly for local government, so councils in Australia and in New Zealand. Nowadays, apart from Drupal, we also extensively work in the integration space with our local government-focused integration tool called SmartGlue. I added my biggest regret in here, which is not contributing to Drupal enough, because I'm well aware that Drupal relies on the selfless contribution of tens of thousands of people all over the world, and I'm about to begin my contribution journey with this presentation. So thanks everyone for joining. Who's the session for? This is not a web form one-on-one session. If you've come to learn how to build a contact form, I've got bad news. We're going to be touching upon web form configuration options that are a bit more complex, so notifications, advanced settings, access controls, permissions, outbound emails, etc. So workflows extends Drupal web form functionality and makes it a lot more than just a data collection tool. Here's a bit of the agenda for today. So what are workflows? Why do workflows matter? A history of workflows in Drupal 7, starting with Drupal 7. We'll get into setting up a workflow using Drupal core, configuring the web form workflows element, managing workflow access controls, run through some workflow notification settings, and talk through some lessons and limitations. Cool. So what are workflows? I'm going to read off the screen now. So a workflow is a structured sequence of tasks that defines how a piece of content, a request, or for the purposes of this presentation, a form submission moves from one state to another. So all of you have probably worked on Drupal, worked with Drupal in some capacity. So if you think about a simple publishing workflow that people would be familiar with, so you have a piece of content, it goes into draft, then it goes into needs review, someone reviews it, and then it goes into published. If you think about a web form submission, think about simple approval workflows. So a web form submission, it's submitted, it goes into an under review stage, and then it's approved or rejected. You think about a customer complaint or customer request workflow. The request is submitted, reviewed, it's allocated, it's actioned by someone else, and it's closed by someone else altogether. And why do workflows matter? A couple of words up on the screen there. So why do workflows matter? Standardization and consistency. And I think with the workflow, we're able to define how something goes from A to B. So it stops people from inventing new ways to break a particular process. Accountability and role-based access. So with a workflow, you can set up role-based access controls, and it helps stop, Bob from marketing from approving a legal contract. Auditability and transparency. So when we use workflows, we choose to log all the different actions that take place. This allows for better auditing and avoiding blame when things go wrong. Automation and efficiency. So how does a workflow help? We're not pushing paper around anymore. We're making Drupal do the work instead of us. user experience and a guided process. Because we're using a digital workflow, we can assume we can add a bit of a guide and actually let people know what to do next. And in short, I think workflows matter because instead of guessing what needs to happen next, everyone knows exactly what to do. A bit of a history of workflows in Drupal. I'm going to start with Drupal 7 because that's how I first got started with using Drupal. You had a bunch of contrib modules. So you had the workbench moderation module, which acted very similar to content moderation now, where you could set up your moderation workflows, so your draft needs review published. And you had the web form workflow module in Drupal 7, which was completely independent of the workbench moderation module. This was installed separately and configured separately. The web form workflow module at its peak was used by around 400 to 500 different websites. And this is before workflow-related modules received any love from Drupal core. This is a peek at the lovely Drupal 7 web form workflows module. You could set up your workflow directly within a particular web form. You could set up your states. You could set up colors. Choose the different users to notify. Choose to notify the actual original submitter. And then you'll have a few operations associated with it. If you went into the operations, you could name your state. You could choose a particular color. And most importantly, you could set up permissions for who could do what when a submission was at a particular state. I'll define what a state is in a little bit. You could set which roles could view the submission when it was under review, which roles could edit the submission when it was under review, and importantly, which roles could change from the state and to the state. So if you think of an approval workflow, the approver has the ability to change from the under review state and then to the approved state. Continuing on with the history of workflows in Drupal. So modern versions of Drupal core workflows get into Drupal core. You have content moderation, which starts off as a contrib module in Drupal 8 and then gets added into core. And then we have the web form workflows element module that gets created in Drupal 9 and works with the core workflows module. A quick look at what the UI looks like for the core workflows module. You set up your states and you set up your transitions. And next we look at the module that we're actually using to get workflows to work with web form submissions. So we're using the web form workflows element module. The module can be installed with Composer just as any other module available in Drupal. This module is under active development, which in Drupal terms means it mostly works, but be prepared for surprises. The first version of this module for Drupal, for modern versions of Drupal, was built by the same people who built the Drupal 7 web form workflow module. So I assume these people love a good challenge. Cool. So now let's look at building a workflow into a web form. So the first step, I've created these GIFs to run through each of the steps. So the first step is actually creating your workflow. Like I said, we are using Drupal core, so you'd visit the core workflows module, you'll click on add a workflow, and what the web form workflows element module gives you is a workflow type. So if you have core and if you have content moderation installed, you'll see the content moderation as one workflow type that you have, but once you install this new module, you will get access to the web form workflow type. So you choose the web form workflow type and you give it a name. So I'm just going to call it an approval workflow or a simple approval workflow, because in this exercise, I'm just going to create a simple approval workflow. And then what I need to do after that, I save it out. I give the first state a label. So the first state that I'm choosing is just the under review state. Once you've set up the workflow, the core workflow, you start adding in your other states. So the first state that you've added in is the under review state. And to define what a state is, I'm sure everyone here knows, but just to define it, a state is a current condition or a status that a submission or a piece of content is in. So here, what am I doing? I've added the under review state, and then because it's a simple approval workflow, I'm adding in an approved state, I'm adding in a rejected state, and I'm also adding in a requires more information state. Cool. So I'm setting up my core workflow at the moment. I've set up my states. And the next thing that you would do is set up your transitions. So a transition is just a pipeline that lets you move a submission from one state to another. And a transition is changing a piece of content, or we're going to use it for a web form workflow. So a transition is changing a web form submission from one state to another. So how you would set up your transitions, you're on the workflow admin screen again, you just choose add a transition. And here you can set up the different transitions that you need available for your web form submission. So I'm going to create an approval transition, which is just moving the submission from under review to approved, a rejection transition, which is moving from under review to rejected, and you can create another one, which is under review to requires more information. It's important to note here that for whatever transition that you want a submission to go through, a transition has to exist. So even if you want a submission to go from approved back to rejected, you'll actually need to add a transition for that, because a transition has to exist for the submission to actually go through that pipeline. Cool. So you've created, so what have we done now? So we've created our core workflow, which includes our states and our transitions. And one thing that I've missed is in the core workflow UI, you also get to choose your initial state. So by default, it's just going to choose your first state as the initial state. So under review is the first state, and that's just going to be the initial state. If you wanted to choose another one, imagine you have a complex workflow, you have 10 states in it, you can choose whichever state you want among those 10 as your initial state. Next step is you set up your web form. You don't have to set it up. It could be an existing web form that you have. Again, I'm assuming that everyone here has dabbled with the Drupal web form module. It's probably my favorite module that exists. It's used by hundreds of thousands of websites around the world. So you set up your web form. I've got like a very simple form here, which is a simple expense claim form. It's just got 4 fields in it. It's asking you what I've bought, how much I've bought of it, what's the cost, and what the total expense is going to be. So I've set up my workflow, and then I've set up the initial bit of my web form. And now we're going to actually go in and add the web form workflows element. So if you have a bit of experience with web forms, and you know that web form fields, essentially they call it elements. Don't know why, but that's what they're called. You would just click on the add element button, just like adding in a text field, a text area, a select option, a checkbox. So you would click on the add element button, and then you can find the web form workflows element. You can name the web form workflows element, and then choose the workflow that you've just created. And you can save it out just to start working on the rest of the configuration with the element itself. So each web form element comes with its own set of configuration. The web form workflows element is very much the same, where it has a heap of different options that you can choose and configure. One is allow changing the workflow state from the view submission page. Very cool option to have there. A person does not have to go and edit a web form submission to actually make a workflow change. They can just do it when they're viewing the results of the submission. A couple of other options that you have are requiring the user to select a transition if one is available, hiding the element if no transitions are available to the user, and logging what's actually happening. So you've got 2 options there. A log message that, let's say the approver wants to write a bit of a note to the original submitter. They can do that through a log message. And you can even add a log message that's only seen by administrators. Moving on with more configuration for your web form workflows element. Something that's really cool with this element is it allows for a transition to automatically happen if a submission is edited. And where that's super useful is if you have a web form submission that's in need of more information, it's in the requires more information state. The submitter logs in, edits the submission, just makes a tiny change, a bit of text change, or adds a new file in, and clicks on save. You can automatically make it transition from requires more information to the under review stage. So that's something that you can do. And very much like the Drupal 7 version of the module, you can choose the different colors that you'd like to apply to the different states. So under review, orange, approved is green, rejected is red, and so on. I think now, latest version of the module, there's probably 10, 15 different colors that you can add. All right, so now we've configured the workflow. We're now configuring the web form. We've configured the workflow. We've set up our web form, the initial bit of the web form, and we're configuring the web form workflows element. We've done the initial piece in configuration. Next, we move on to something that's really important as a part of setting up web form workflows. This is setting up your access controls or your transition permissions. Like any other web form element, you can click on the access tab, and then you'll have your default sort of permissions that you can set up there, which is like create, view, update the element. But if you scroll a bit to the bottom, you'll see permissions that you can associate with each of your transitions. So imagine you have an approver role. You can say that the approver gets to make the approval transition. The approver gets to make the rejection transition. Imagine if you had 10 roles over there and 10 different transitions. You can assign different roles to each of these transitions that you have, so it can get quite complex. What you can also do is you can actually specify which users have access to make this particular transition change. So you might be working in an organization where there's 10 supervisors. These 10 supervisors get to approve the simple expense claim. You can either give them the role or you can type those users into the system. Cool. So you've set up your workflow, you've set up your initial bit of the web form, and you're setting up your web form workflows element module. That's all done. You've set up your access controls. Now, how do we notify the people that need to actually action this change? And if you're familiar with web forms, web form has the concept of emails and handlers. So you can go to your settings, your emails and handlers section. You'll see a new button up at the top, which is called Add Workflow Change Email. So this handler lets you send or trigger an email based on a particular transition taking place. So as an example, if the approval transition takes place, you can send an email to the original submitter saying that it's been approved. The rejected transition takes place. You can do the same thing with the you can email the original submitter, tell them their submission has been rejected. But you can also have I'm talking about a simple approval workflow. You can have workflows with 5 different states and 10 different transitions. You can set up emails that go to different people based on what transition is taking place. To note, to send that first email to the approver, you don't need to set up an add workflow change email. You can just simply set up an email stating, hey, a submission's been made, have a look and approve or reject. Cool. All right, so at this point, I did want to do a live demo, but I value my dignity, so I've decided to skip it. We look at what an approval screen looks like in action. And this assumes that your approver can see the results of the submission or has a tokenized link where they can see the submission. So what they get is they get an email with a link to the submission, or they have direct view results access, whichever. They can review the details, and wherever the web form workflows element has been placed in the web form, they'll get a screen over here where they can see what the current state is. They can choose to make a particular transition, so approve, reject, or request for more information. They can add a bit of a log, and then they can save the workflow. And this is where the magic happens. This is where the decision is made, and then it's recorded. Again, I'm noting that the approver needs to be able to see the results. So they have some sort of results access, or they have a tokenized link where they click on the link and it takes them to the result. Cool. So once the approval happens, we need a way for administrators to track them. This is the workflow results screen. We get, again, a part of this comes from the web form workflows element module. This is the workflow screen. We get a quick overview of all of the form submissions and their statuses, and we can also see who processed the previous change. And you get to also filter by approval state, see the submission details, all of that. And if you're dealing with a large number of submissions, this type of interface, I guess, saves us a lot of time and inbox chaos and all of that. Cool. So we've seen how the web form workflows can function. What did we learn, or what did I learn? So while web forms sort of bring structure, they also come with quirks and gotchas and stakeholder expectations that need to be managed. Workflows can get quite complicated. A single workflow might need a heap of transitions, a lot more than you expected. So try to keep it simple where possible. And setting up workflows like the way that I did can often require a lot of new Drupal roles for every stage of the approval. And this could cause a permission headache. So plan your roles wisely. We've had situations where we've had to create 30, 40 different roles to help allow people to make these transitions. All right, Drupal core workflows are great for content moderation, but when it comes to web forms, there's some sort of awkward fits and workarounds. If your workflow involves conditional approval, multiple reviewers, or a lot of external integration, we'd have to write a heap of custom code for that, with custom logic. An example of a massive bit of customization that we had to do is to hook into a customer's Active Directory hierarchy. So in order to determine not just who a person's manager is, but who the manager's manager is, who the manager's manager's manager is, all the way up to the CEO, so that you could have a workflow that has 10, 20 transitions sort of filter all the way up to the CEO, think a disclosure of information workflow. So Drupal doesn't do this out of the box, obviously. It's a bit of a screen of some of the customizations. Limitations. So once a workflow is applied to a web form, changing it can break things, disappearing transitions, lost states, a bit of chaos. So need to be wary of that. There's also no way for users to track what's awaiting their approval. And it depends on people looking at their inbox. You might get the "I never saw the email" excuse. Access settings sometimes can be a bit of a maze, especially when you have a heap of roles and a heap of transitions to manage and set up access controls for. And managing these workflows isn't the most user-intuitive experience, especially for non-technical users. The workflow states, the transitions, and roles can get very confusing, even for experienced administrators. So keep documentation handy and train your admins properly. Cool. And final thoughts before taking questions. Yes, workflows can get messy, but it makes Drupal Webforms a lot more powerful, a lot more than just a data collection tool. I know I've sort of run through this conversation or this talk in the context of a particular module, and I see this module becoming a lot more stable and useful in the future. So thanks for joining the session. Cheers. Questions? Anyone?
Have we got any questions for PJ?
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
If you ever did have more than one form,
Yeah.
to your permissions from what I could see would be done at the form level, not in the workflow itself. So you might end up with two forms in conflict. I thought the permissions for who can approve should be part of the flow, not the form. Does that make sense to you?
You could. So you're setting up the permissions per web form, and the workflow sort of outside of that. You can also set up the same workflow for two different web forms with different permissions attached to it. So I might not be understanding your question, but I don't think a conflict actually occurs because you're assigning the permissions based on the web form, not the workflow. It could be. Workflows are a bit dangerous. Anyone else? Yes.
Does this support deep-covered architects like REST API available?
That's a good question. We haven't tried that out yet, but I would be very keen on trying that out. I'm sorry, I think it might support it. Haven't tried that out. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, that was just about will it work in a decoupled sense?
Cool.
Any more questions?